Hello everybody and welcome back to the channel. I am your host, God of Heroics, and as you see, we are on the Jujutsu Kaisen wiki for domain expansions. And this is because I actually did a stream over on IRIAM at God of Heroics, and we went over this entirely condensed lesson plan that I made some time ago, discussing domain expansions. But we talked about everything: curse energy, as far as the basics to the complicated stuff. We talked about curse objects, curse tools, and all of that stuff. And while I was condensing those videos and editing them down so I can post them on the channel here in April, I ended up accidentally deleting the one for domain expansions while getting rid of the old videos that were already edited down and posted onto the channel. So I'm just re-recording this because I am kind of an idiot. So we're gonna go over everything regarding domain expansions, and I'm just gonna have the wiki up here just so that we can have some images and some GIFs and stuff to go along with all of the important stuff. There is a bit to go over. It looks like a lot, but I promise you it's actually not that much information. So we're just going to read through this and go to the wiki for the visuals. So if you like these kind of videos, this kind of content, go ahead and leave a like on the video, subscribe, hit the notification bell, all the YouTuber button stuff. So let's get started. A domain expansion is the most advanced of all barrier techniques, so if you saw my previous video on barriers, this shouldn't be that new to you. And can be thought of as the final form of Jujutsu. It's a physical manifestation of a sorcerer's innate domain using a vast amount of cursed energy inside of a barrier, thus successfully creating a separate space. So essentially what this is, I don't think there's a visual specifically for that description, but that's okay. We're gonna pull up this visual anyway. So essentially, when using a domain, pretty much in the user's mind, they already have kind of like their own mindscape in a sense. So think of like how Yuji, when Sukuna is inside of him in season 1 and 2, when we see Mahito interact with him with his domain, he sees Sukuna just sitting in this world where like the ground looks like it's all blood, like full of blood, and like there's the throne of bones and all that stuff. That is essentially Sukuna's innate domain. Like that's like his mindscape inside of like his soul, essentially, like inside of his mind. And what they're doing is projecting that with a vast amount of cursed energy onto the outer world, which is contained inside of a barrier. Sukuna specifically does not have a barrier on his domain, and that's because he does it for the risk factor. If you remember when we talked about binding vows, that is one of the kind of things that you can do is adding a bit of a risk factor to your ability, thus allowing your ability to be stronger through the idea that it is possible to be escaped or countered far more easily. So without a barrier, it's easy for anybody to escape, whether they have cursed energy or not, and it makes it easier for them to get away. However, now his attacks are stronger, and considering that he's using guaranteed hits, that's gonna really damage a lot of people. So now that we've gotten that out the way, let's continue here. So my comparison here is pretty much thinking of it like the reality marbles from the Fate series. If you don't know, let me go ahead and show you what an example of that is. We are just gonna look up Fate Stay Night. Whoa. Fate Stay Night. The Unlimited Blade Works. I probably should have looked up something very specific, but it's okay. Let's say incantation. So there is a character named Shiro Emiya. There's another version of him in the same franchise who they just simply call Archer, and there is an incantation that he can use to basically create a reality marble. His ability, he can pretty much use two different things: projection magic and reinforcement magic. So he can project the pretty much any, like an illusion of sense of any weapon he wants, which is these two daggers, and then use reinforcement magic to make them real in a sense. And he creates what they have abilities called noble phantasms, which is, in this case, let's just say it's equivalent to a domain expansion. And he creates what they call in their world reality marbles with his innate ability, and it requires a vast amount of mana. In a sense, it's pretty much the same thing. You're pretty much using your vast amount of mana to create a giant barrier that you can pretty much uh, expand your own reality onto. His takes a lot of mana and then an enchantment as well to help condition and refine that mana to make it as perfect of a reality marble as possible. And it's pretty much the same with domain expansions, where Gojo here, as you see, has created an entire barrier around him and these people and these monsters of a sort, and he's pretty much using his influx of refined cursed energy. Fortunately for him, he doesn't need an incantation for this. Well, I guess you can consider them calling out their moves an incantation. Just calling out their domain expansions. Domain expansion, infinite void, or whatever. That could be his incantation, maybe a shortened version. And he's projecting the essence of infinity, in a sense, throughout the entirety of his barrier. Sorry if that was a little bit of a winded explanation, but trying to get the point across as best as I can. So the domain is completed when the sorcerer's curse technique being imbued inside the barrier, which not only improves the technique and its effectiveness, but also ensures that every attack is guaranteed to hit. Essentially, the sorcerer can use their techniques and apply their technique to their domain. And when they do this, their technique is not only stronger and far more effective, but it also cannot miss its target. We are going to talk about countermeasures later on for things like this, but for now, that's just the idea. So in Sukuna's fight with Maharaga, he had his cleave dismantle technique being the primary use for his domain expansion. And it's actually possible through binding vows, which we will talk about in a little bit, to change certain aspects of your domain. So pretty much as long as you're within Sukuna's domain, he can hit you with cleave and dismantle on pretty much instantaneously. All right, moving on forward. It says a hand sign unique to each sorcerer is needed as a catalyst for this expansion. From the outside, a domain with a closed barrier appears as a floating black sphere. There might be an image for that on here somewhere, and we will find it. But essentially, let's just go over it a little bit. Pretty much, they have a hand sign that they use to help them pretty much concentrate on creating their domain, as you've seen with multiple characters like Hikari here using his domain with his little hand sign here. And then, as we saw earlier, Sukuna was using his own specific hand sign right there from Malevolent Shrine, and we know Gojo has his own as well, where he crosses his fingers, trying to making the infinity sign with his fingers. And then any ones that have a closed barrier, this is the sign, by the way. Any ones that have a closed barrier, I'm pretty sure there's an image for it, but it's just not popping up here anyway. Pretty much it closes around the entire, don't need a picture to explain it, but it's a black sphere pretty much. And we will talk about changes to that as well when we get there. So if an innate domain is expanded using cursed energy but isn't imbued with the user's cursed technique, it'll result in being an incomplete domain. This is the third version of domains as far as barriers and cursed techniques go, as far as the creation, even if it has a closed barrier. So whether there's a closed barrier or an open barrier, so closed barriers being like Gojo's and open barrier being like that of Sukuna's, regardless of whether there is or is not a barrier, if you cannot properly imbue your technique into your domain, it is an incomplete domain. You still have full control over everything that is within your domain. However, you do not have the guaranteed hit factor, and your attacks are not more effective as you would hope. And I believe, to my knowledge, that the only example of this is Megami. Who is this? Megami? There we go. Megami Fushiguro, to my knowledge, is the only character with an incomplete domain. I could be wrong about that. Let's take a look at what it says about incomplete domains here, and it does not state any other characters with an incomplete domain. Yeah, so as far as I know, and as far as I've seen, from what I remember, Megami is the only one with an incomplete domain. So, yeah, so like I said, no guarantee hit factor. Oh, but they still do get the improved curse technique. My fault. Megami used this when fighting a special grade curse. He pretty much made the entire area his like, you know, like an extension of his shadow, where he would be able to summon any of his beasts, any of his what are they called, Shikigami, from anywhere, and he would be able to attack his opponents from any direction, any angles whatsoever. And then he could also absorb his enemies inside of his shadow, where he will then carry their existence in his shadow, where they are essentially falling forever, which is so terrifying. So, moving on. In the distant past, there is another form of domain, by the way. So, we talked about as far as the creation of domains. So, you can create it with or without a barrier, and you have to imbue your technique to it for it to be considered a perfect domain. Otherwise, it ends up being an incomplete domain. But there are three types of domains in general, as we saw up here. There is lethal domains, non-lethal domains, and incomplete domains. We went over complete domains, so let's go over lethal and non-lethal domains, as these are the two versions of complete or perfect domains that anyone can use. My fault. I thought I heard one of my cats scratching hella hard. So, in the distant past, domain expansions were a far more common technique, because in those days, domains weren't considered to be offensive in nature. They mainly were used to trap opponents in a barrier, or they were forced to abide by the rules laid out by the user's curse technique. Over the years, more domains were crafted for lethality, and less sorcerers were able to hang with this new height of sorcery. So, essentially, there were domains way back when that were made specifically for pretty much trapping an opponent, so that they have to pretty much abide by your rules. They can't, you know, freely do whatever they want anymore. And the best example of this is a character that we have not seen in season 3, but going over his domain will not technically count as spoilers. We're gonna go ahead and explain it right now, because I mean, let's just consider this an early access for a future series, where I'm going to be talking about all domain expansions, probably in order of how they appear, but that may or may not be true. We'll see. Get out of your ad. Okay, so Higuruma, he is a lawyer, and his domain expansion is domain expansion deadly sentencing. It is a non-lethal domain, and it says this domain reflects a small courtroom where the user and their targets stand across from one another, playing the roles of prosecutor and defendant. There are numerous guillotines in the background with chopped up debris beneath them. Deadly sentencing is a type of domain that does not contain a can't miss attack or a sure hit attack. Instead, it forces those inside to follow the rules of the user's curse technique. The domain isn't constructed to be lethal or implements a binding vow requiring the user to explain the aforementioned rules. The trial-based curse technique imbued into the domain allows the user to prosecute their target with the Shikigami called Judge Man. That is this thing right here with the blackened, sunken eyes, serving as its namesake. There is no violence allowed inside of the domain for either side, and proceedings begin immediately after activation. First, the judgment will announce the charges against the defendant, which are actual crimes they may or may not have committed. Judgment automatically knows everything about everyone inside the domain, but this information isn't shared with the caster. The verdict of the trial depends only on the arguments presented by both sides. After the accusation is reviewed, the defendant is given one chance to defend their case. They have three options: silence, confession, or denial. If the defendant chooses to deny the charges, they can lie in their statements. Um, the defendant's goal is to dispel all doubt and win pronouncement of innocence from judgment. So it says they can lie in their statement, but they also said that the crime that is said can either be something they did or did not do. I'm not going to explain what this was used for, as this has not shown up in the manga, but it is important, as you'll see later. But anyway, the prosecutor only has one chance to make a statement, but there is a rebuttal. But theirs is a rebuttal based on evidence submitted by Judge Mann for deliberation. The evidence submitted appears as a sealed envelope in the prosecutor's hands. The evidence submitted is not necessarily conclusive and is not opened or and shared with the defendant until after their statement, but the prosecutor will be informed of the contained information by Judge Mann upon receiving the envelope. Once the prosecution and defense have both made their statements, Judge Mann will deliver a lawful verdict. If the defendant is found guilty, they are punished with one of what is implied to be several different sentences. Not even the user can be sure of which sentence their opponent will receive. In some situations, depending on the severity of the crime, harsher punishment can be handed out. One sentence the Judge Mann will commonly give is confiscation, which prevents them from being able to use curse techniques. So Judge Mann can literally steal your technique from you if you're found guilty, depending on the severity of the crime that you were just sentenced with. After the verdict, the domain dispels, and the punishment immediately affects the guilty party. So even outside of the domain, once this domain is over, if you were prosecuted and you received a punishment, that punishment continues after the domain closes. However, if the defendant is found guilty without an open confession, they can request a retrial that Judge Mann cannot deny. So essentially, it's just a real court case. It is an actual real court case, but the evidence that Judge Mann brings for whatever you're being accused of is something that you essentially have no say in. It's Judge Mann automatically knows everything about you once this domain is used on you, and he pops up any evidence that he wants for any crime that you may or may not have committed, and that is very important. It can be something that you did, but something that you're not guilty of. And again, I don't want to give spoilers to why that sentence makes sense, but essentially you get it. All right. Next, we are going to be talking about lethal domains. So, as it said in the previous paragraph about non-lethal domains, originally that's how domains were. They were non-lethal and just used to force people into basically playing into their hand, playing their game. There was a time period where domains started getting more lethal, and that's because there was a lot of sorcerer on sorcerer violence. And because of that, a lot of people started tailoring their domains to having a more lethal, more lethal use. And that's the ones that we normally see, like Infinite Void and Malevolent Shrine. And as we'll see with pretty much all the other domain expansions, it's really hard to talk about domain expansions when we haven't seen that many of them, at least in the anime. Lethal domain expansions need even more skill and cursed energy to produce than non-lethal domains. This is literally just because non-lethal domains just place a rule set along with the binding vow that make that rule set happen no matter what. And then lethal domains are basically using an attack at all times, and they're specifically targeting and automatically hitting targets within the domain. So obviously it would take more skill, more refined cursed techniques, and it would also take more cursed energy in general to cast. They require the sorcerer to manifest a massive space from their innate domain, and they have to close a barrier around it with their imbued technique. They don't have to close a barrier around it because, as we've seen, Sukuna does not have a barrier around his, and I believe Kinjaku also doesn't have a barrier. Not really a spoiler, but just letting you know. And then Megami, his is Megamine explosion. Megami, his is incomplete, but it also does not have a barrier. Sue, where did I leave off? Yeah, they have close barrier with a around it with their imbue technique. Anyway, in a short amount of time, blah blah blah. So basically, they have to cast it in a specific amount of time. I don't think the window for casting is smaller than the window for a non-lethal. I don't think so. I don't think that's really explained. Um, Megami can't expand a lethal domain because he struggles to create an artificial space with a barrier, uh, basically leaving his domain as incomplete. Essentially, he lacks imagination. That's kind of what it's like. It's like um, pretty much his mindscape isn't complete, I guess you could say. It's like when you're the best way to explain it is right now is like how you clearly see like I'm a VTuber, or technically right now I would guess you would consider this a PNG tuber. But yeah, it's like that. So before I had my model, before I had the background that I use in some of my other videos, like the heavenly skies with the mirrored ground and all that stuff, before doing all that, you could essentially say that like my domain expansion, if I was in JJK, would create that little world, you know, with the back, with the clouds in the background, the water effect, and all that stuff. Whatever my technique is, isn't important, but that's what it will look like because now I have that idea more refined and can picture it in my head. That is like essentially my mindscape. Megami doesn't have that. Is pretty much what that's saying. So only Sukuna and Kinjaku are capable of manifesting a lethal domain expansion without an outer shell on their barrier. That's not properly explained, by the way. I don't necessarily know why that's the case. It's like there is a barrier, but not really, because like they have a range, obviously, on their technique, but and their personal technique is applied to the range. Sorry, I'm yawning. But their technique is applied to the range of their domain. However, they don't need a barrier to cast it, even though it says that you imbue your technique to the barrier. However, removing the barrier does increase the risk factor of your opponent escaping, which I've said before, which makes the technique stronger. Domain expansions give sorcerers an advantage at the cost of immense amount of cursed energy, but they cause the innate technique to become unstable for some time. If they try to use techniques, they will fail to activate. If they try to use their curse techniques, they'll fail to activate. Pretty much, you cannot spam your domain. It takes a shit ton of energy to use, of curse energy to use. So yeah, it's really hard to do it. There's few characters that can. Hikari, Gojo, and Sukuna. Gojo and Sukuna can do it because they both have extreme wells of cursed energy. Gojo has an extreme well of cursed energy, but also the Six Eyes allows him to pretty much utilize less cursed energy in a more refined way in order to pretty much use his curse technique at all, whether it be him utilizing blue, red, purple, whatever you have you, his limitless. It's as long as he's utilizing his technique, he's using pretty much just a perfect amount of energy to get that done. Sukuna, on the other hand, he has a huge well of cursed energy, primarily because, much like Gojo, he's fairly mastered. He's a huge master of his cursed energy. He's basically been utilizing it for so long that he can essentially tell the exact amount of cursed energy it's going to take to basically kill somebody with one of his techniques. Um, there's only small exception to that, obviously being Gojo, which is a character he will fight. As we all know, he's going to fight Gojo. It's not a spoiler, but Yeah, it's in him, Gojo, and then Maharaga, as we saw in season two, he couldn't just one shot Maharaga. I mean, he had enough curse energy to like slice through him, obviously, but he didn't know exactly how much he needed to off him until he decided, to experiment with that. And anyway, also, Sukuna is a cursed spirit, so cursed spirits pretty much feed on negative energy, and then the more people that fear you, the more energy you have, and blah 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 blah. It's a lot of stuff that's for Sukuna. But then there's Hikari, um, who can also utilize his technique multiple times, and it's because his technique has an effect called jackpot, where when he lands a jackpot, it refreshes his cursed energy and pretty much restores him to full as well, like is using like reverse curse technique to completely heal him, which is also another reason that Gojo and Sukuna can utilize their techniques multiple times, because they also have reverse curse techniques. um, it's very limited in how much it can heal, because there is a limit to how many times they can use their curse techniques in a single day. But yeah, essentially that is pretty much why they are the only ones that can use it multiple times. So moving on, it says, now it may seem like a domain expansion is a no diff GG no re, but there are in fact several countermeasures that we're going to list off. Uh, to what was it? I'm sorry, I'm a little sleepy. We're gonna list them off from least to most effective. So let's go look at these countermeasures. Boom. One countermeasure that I actually did not bring up. I don't think I brought it up. Let me take a look. Boom, boom, boom. I think I did, but I want to talk about it just a little bit, because it did end up being a little bit of a loophole. But pretty much using your own domain is a way of basically counterattacking it. Uh, in in the manga, and in the anime, Dagon used his domain, and Megami used his domain on top of the barrier for Dagon's domain. And because of the nature of shadow manipulation that Megami utilizes, he was able to pretty much puncture a small hole big enough for a person to go through onto Dagon's barrier, which was the original plan that would allow everybody to escape, everyone being Nanami, Maki, and Naobito. So that was pretty much just him using his brain, and that's we'll talk about it when we get there. The reason why that's the case. So there are several techniques. One of them is called Hollow Wicker Basket. Hollow Wicker Basket is first up on the list. A sorcerer can weave their fingers, basically interlocking them between one another, to create a basket shape essentially with their hand, with their arms fully extended, and it creates a basket like shield that disrupts the enemy's barrier. So pretty much anytime a barrier is opened inside of a domain, it disrupts what their domain barrier is and what it's made for. And that's because the barrier that is made for the sake of a domain expansion has the innate technique applied to it with essentially like a innate binding vow saying that the attack has to land. So when another person opens their own barrier, their own personal barrier, one like Hollow Wicker Basket, it's essentially opening a barrier that says these attacks can't hit me, and then that disrupts what the other barrier said, because now there are two barriers contradicting each other. This Hollow Wicker Basket is a weaker barrier than a domain barrier, obviously. However, it is consistent as long as that person is holding that pose. So consistency is a little bit better than just an OP barrier. So it can't stop curse techniques as a whole, though. So it's basically useless against incomplete and non-lethal domains. So, for example, let's say you got caught with Malevolent Shrine and you go ahead and pop Hollow Wicker Basket. You are not going to be getting hit with the slashes, the cleave and dismantle that Sukuna is using, because, you know, that would be the technique that is applied to his domain expansion. However, if he decides to pop Fuga and shoot you with a flaming arrow, you're going to get hit with that flame arrow. The Hollow Wicker Basket barrier is not going to defend you against that. Next on the list is called Falling Blossom Emotion. Falling Blossom Emotion is a secret art passed down through the three big families. The three big families being the Gojo family, which Satoru Gojo is from, the Zenin clan, which Maki and Naoya, Nobito, and all of them are from, Megami and Toji are also from there. And then you have the Kamo clan, which Noritoshi Kamo is from, and then also technically Yuji, Choso, So Kechizu, the other Death Moon paintings, they're all part of that family, along with the other Noritoshi Kamo, who was Kinjaku. It covers the user in cursed energy that nullifies a domain's guaranteed attack the moment they make contact. This is higher than Hollow Wicker Basket for two reasons. You don't have to hold a specific pose, so you maintain mobility and use of your hands, and the cursed energy can be applied to a weapon as well. So weapon users like Yuta would be able to utilize their weapon to deflect attacks. This is so much better, and let me explain why, because again, this falls into the risk factor. So you know how, wow, that countermeasure section is really small on here. So, you know how we keep talking about risk factors when it comes to techniques and making them stronger. So, with Falling Blossom Emotion, the barrier is pretty much around that person's body. It's not like a big dome around them, but it's like wearing a barrier as like a secondary skin. It's like armor of sorts. So, with this being the case, that would mean that with a thinner barrier just around you, that you're technically at a bigger risk of getting hit, because the attacks are getting closer to your body than they would if you were using a simple domain, which we'll talk about next, or the Hollow Wicker Basket technique that we just talked about earlier. But because you don't need to use a hand sign, someone like Yuta could run around, use full mobility to dodge, jump, get closer to their enemy who's casting the domain, and then he can also extend that barrier onto his sword, using his sword to block and deflect incoming attacks. So not only are you able to stop the instant hit attacks, which Hollow Wicker Basket can also do, but you also have full mobility. You can extend it to your weapon, and now if, let's say, same situation, Sukuna's using his domain, the cleave and dismantle is not hitting you because of the barrier, but now because you have your weapon fully equipped with your barrier, you can use the weapon to deflect the Fuga fire arrow that he's going to be sending your way, obviously. Now we are going to get into simple domains, which is the other barrier technique that is not a domain that we'll be talking about on this list as a countermeasure to domain expansions. Referred to as the domain for the weak, we have the simple domain. New Shadow style simple domain is basically a sorcerer manifesting only the barrier of their own domain around them to defend from the effects of a domain expansion. As we talked about before, a domain has a barrier, and the barrier can be interfered with by creating another barrier, as we saw with Hollow Wicker Basket. This one is a little bit tougher to deal with, because with Hollow Wicker Basket, you can block oncoming attacks that are, of course, the sure hit factor of a domain, while with anything else that you get, being Falling Blossom Emotion, it's specifically for blocking the innate technique and also any other curse technique. Also, you still keep that mobility and can deflect other attacks. But with simple domain, you get all of that plus a far more durable barrier on you. And this is because the strongest kind of barrier is that of your domain. In case you did not know, let me go ahead and explain this. I probably failed to mention this before, but when you're inside of someone's domain barrier, well, the barrier is specifically for their domain, and I say this because obviously we have barrierless domains like Kinjaku and Sukuna. The the barrier is really hard to break through. So the outside of the barrier is super tough, and we're going to talk about strengthening that as well later on. But it's super tough to break into someone's domain, and it's also, I think, harder if I remember correctly. It's even harder to break out of someone's domain. So if you're creating a domain specific barrier inside of that domain, not only is it going to go ahead and interrupt that barrier, but it's also giving you a much stronger technique to go ahead and utilize. Well, it's giving you a much stronger barrier to go ahead and block their technique with, is what I meant to say. My apologies. But let's continue from where we left off. So, so originally, this skill was crafted with a binding vow stating that it can't be taught to outsiders, but much like Kinjaku and Sukuna with their body snatching techniques, to use the host technique, there is a loophole. While it can't be taught to outsiders, outsiders of the new shadow style, it can be learned by anyone who sees it and can figure out how it's done. Yuki, Toto, and Gojo have all figured this out. The new shadow style doesn't last as long as the previous methods when going up against a powerful enough domain, but it can buy the user some time, like Gojo did when he fought Sukuna. He uses the time that he had in his simple domain to heal himself with reverse curse technique. While it doesn't last as long as a strong domain, it's still ranked higher because it can also be used offensively. All right. And to be honest, I think that pretty much explains itself. I mean, you can utilize it, and while that barrier is up, it gives you time. You can buy your time to, utilize a different strategy. Unfortunately, it's not super long lasting, but it is a very tough barrier that you can cast, and it has an offensive nature. The offensive nature we also see a lot with this girl here, Miwa. She uses her simple domain so that anybody who enters it, she can pretty much instantly hit them with her sword. It's like a small version of an innate technique because her swordsmanship is actually a technique that is taught by the new shadow style. So if someone steps into her simple barrier, it's like having a very small domain expansion. I would also consider this to be an alt version of like an incomplete domain, but a more refined version where the technique and the barrier are pretty much in tune with each other. The barrier being a way to detect anyone coming in and out. Unfortunately, not stopping people from getting in and out, but being able to block innate techniques and all that stuff and other techniques. So it's pretty much a shield against cursed techniques, but allowing people to walk in whenever they want. And then once they're in, she has pinpoint accuracy to be able to use her EI Jutsu to attack her enemies. And because she's technically using that in tandem with her barrier, it can, in a sense, be considered a sure hit attack. Anyway, I know that's a lot of yapping. Well, I've been yapping this whole time, so who really cares? Simple domains can be customized. Let's talk about customization in general. So I'm going to read this and then we'll talk about customizations in general. Simple domains can be customized by using binding vows to set rules that affect those inside. There are numerous sword techniques within the new shadow style that are built around the idea of countering anyone who would step inside the range of the barrier. This is what we just talked about. Any target that steps inside the barrier has their curse technique sealed for their duration for their duration there. So simple domains aren't only used for countering domain expansions, making it much more versatile anti-domain strategies. So for example, let's continue to go with Sukuna since he has one of the most popular domains. Fuck it, let's go with Gojo. Gojo, you're mid-fight with him. He stands right in front of your face, flexing on you because you can't hit him, and he pops Infinite Void right in front of your face. That's terrifying. But if you're fast enough, let's say you don't have enough cursed energy to use your domain expansion, or you don't have one yet. What you could do is use a simple domain. And the barrier created from your simple domain will expand outwards around you. And now Gojo, who was flexing on you, standing in your face, thinking that he was hot shit, is now not only in the range of your EI Jutsu with your new Shadow Style swordsmanship, but he also has his curse technique sealed, meaning no infinity. Which means that that is possibly one of the best chances you'll ever have to land a hit on Gojo. However, Miwa goes ahead and does waste this technique when fighting Kinjaku, creating a binding vow that if she gets to swing this sword this one time at Kinjaku, that she will never swing her sword ever again. And she says this because she believes this attack and this binding vow is the only way to kill Kinjaku. And unfortunately, he catches her blade like Aizen, shutting off Ichigo's theme song. If Miwa had her own theme song, I'm sure the same thing would have happened. So, customizations in general. So as we were stating, your barrier can be customized. One of the customizations that Gojo utilizes with customizing his barrier, he actually is able to shrink it. And he gets this idea after coming out of the prison realm because, as we talked about before, the prison realm is a cursed object. And this cursed object is essentially a giant ceiling barrier, and somehow has a lot of seemingly infinite space on the inside. And that is because barriers can be customized. So the customization here is that what you can do is change the size of your barrier. And by doing this, you're not changing the size of the people inside because, like we talked about before, you are projecting your entire mindscape inside of this barrier, pretty much creating your own reality inside. So no matter the size of the barrier on the outside, the space on the inside is pretty much going to be giant. Think of it like the TARDIS in Doctor Who, or like one of those bigger on the inside bags, like a bag of holding or something. It's essentially like that. And by doing this, you also make the barrier on the outside much stronger. I'm not going to explain why that's important. You'll have to see it or read it in the manga. It's up to you guys when Gojo has his fight with Sukuna. But yeah, it is very important. You can, in fact, customize your barrier. Another thing that you can do, you can customize your domain expansion with binding vows. You can use a binding vow if you wish to change the hand sign needed for your domain. You can probably, if you really want, change the name of your domain, and that could be a way to trick up your enemies. You could possibly change it and make it so that, okay, now I have to say these words instead of these words. Like if Sukuna wanted to, he could be like, oh, I no longer say Malevolent Shrine when I use my domain. Instead, I say domain expansion cut of 1,000 souls or something like that. And then people will be a little confused because they're like, oh shit, what's he about to do? But in reality, it's the same old move. Also, you can use a binding vow. I know I'm talking about binding vows a lot right now, but that's pretty much how you change or customize anything when referring to your curse techniques and curse energy. But you can use a binding vow to change the technique utilized on your domain. So let's say take someone like Yuku, Yuku? What the heck is Yuku? Someone like Yuta, my favorite male character in all of Jujutsu Kaisen. He, as we all know, has the ability to copy other techniques. So when utilizing his domain expansion, which technique is being applied? Because his technique is to copy other techniques, which means that the only techniques that he has that he could possibly apply are techniques that he has copied. So if, let's say, for example, he makes I don't know, let's say that that big purple blast that he used to defeat Geto in the movie Zero is his innate technique, and he's like, oh, I'm gonna apply this to my barrier with my domain expansion so I can pretty much instant one hit somebody with this. And then he does that. If the person is utilize a simple domain and his attack is about to end, but that person's barrier is also about to break, he can use a binding vow to change the innate technique that's on his domain expansion to be curse speech, and then he can go ahead and utilize curse speech to tell his opponent to do literally anything. Like once their simple domain is over, he could say grovel, and then they'll have to like bow down to him, and in which case he'd be able to kill them. I don't know. I'm just yapping, making stuff up, but you get the point. Well, I mean, not making stuff up, but explaining how this works. But anyway, the best counter to any domain expansion is for a sorcerer to use their own. This is the last bit before the end of the video. A domain clash will result in the victory of the most refined domain leading and the other one falling apart. There's no telling how long this will take. It varies based on which I just put donations. That's crazy. Which domains are closing. So Gojo's domain immediately overtook Gojo. Sorry, these name changes. God, it's so annoying. We have Toji, Todo, Yuji, Gojo, Jogo. It's so annoying. Yuka, Yuta. Jesus Christ. Anyway, Gojo's domain immediately overtook Jogo's domain, but that was because of how much superior his domain was in comparison. If domains overlap, the sheer hit from both cancel each other out. As we talked about before, introducing another barrier to your barrier disrupts your barrier. At this point in battle, the two combatants must fight for dominance, and the one that takes the heaviest damage or loses control of their domain will collapse and they have lost the struggle with the other, where the other fighter will get their sure hit back instantly, gaining advantage. If any more than two domains clash, it will force all of the barriers to become unstable and fall apart. That is actually where this meme came from. Oh, I think I'm over it. Let me scooch over a little bit. But that's where this meme came from. This is Yuta and two other characters that you will be seeing in the Culling games using their domain expansions all at the same time. And after doing so, they all hit each other. Their domains hit each other, like the outer barriers, and they all collapse. No such thing happened with Gojo and Sukuna because it is just the two of them. But with Yuta and these other two, it definitely did happen. And that brings us to the end of the video and the end of our Cursed Energy Explained series. So now you have officially heard and been told of everything regarding Cursed Energy. And whoop, I hope you guys learned a lot. To be honest, this was pretty fun to go over. Again, we are still going to do a series where we talk about different curse techniques. And we're going to make that as interesting as possible. I want to talk about the different curse techniques that characters have in the series, as there are a lot of them, and how they work. Some of them more complicated than others. And then on top of that, we're going to talk about domain expansions, each individual character's domain expansions and how they work. And we will also be trying to give like little tips here and there about how those characters' techniques could be a little bit better, maybe a little bit more refined. Anyway, that is going to be it for me, and I will see you guys in the next one. Peace.